Good morning, everybody. It's good to see everybody this morning. It's a party. It's a party. Don't do that. We have a special treat this morning. You know, it's funny how people enter into your lives. And I got my oldest son here this morning, Hampton. It's not funny how he entered into my life. But so when Hampton was in, Ray, how old were you, Hampton? 14. When Hampton was 14, he needed a tutor. And so Lene got him a tutor. And she came home talking about how great this guy was that was tutoring Hampton. And after a few weeks, she said, hey, the tutor wants to have a conference with us. And I was like, the tutor wants to have a conference? What has he done now? The tutor wants to have a conference with the parents. So we had this conference, and I met Ray, and that was the beginning of, I didn't know it that day, but Ray has become just, not just a friend, but a part of our family. And we just love Ray so much. And a few weeks ago, most of you know that Ray was our student minister up until just a couple months ago, and he took this big job. Is it a big job, Ray? It's a big job. He took this fantastic job as the director of the Huntsville Inner City Learning Center. He's doing a great job there, and he's able to use his gifts, and all of you that know Ray know his gifts. He's just an amazing person. And he came back just a couple of weeks ago, and we were standing back here talking. He said, Rob, he said, I would love to take the load off of you one Sunday and just come and do the message. And I said, I will take you up on that. And so I called him earlier this week and asked him if he would do it, and he agreed. And so we are privileged to have our own Ray Allister back to speak to us this morning. Let's give him a warm welcome. Thanks, man. Love you, man.
Woo. Good morning, everybody. Well, I would say this is home for me in Huntsville. It's always a privilege to be here, to be with you. I'm not going to get emotional. I've been overly emotional the last couple of weeks because God's been moving. And I told Rob, when I told him about this, I've been leaving here was very difficult. It was a very difficult decision. But there were some things that God needed me to free up so that I can do what I'm doing now, which is traveling to different churches to be able to share the messages that he's bringing to me. And that's been just really important because what Rob has done such a good job of inculcating here in this church is the heart of Christ, right? And so what is it to be human? What is it to be a son or daughter of God? What does that mean for us, and what does it look like in our everyday life? Because if you're not actually tapping into that, there's something wrong, right? It's the amount of power that we have at our disposal that is left on the table, and that's a big part here. But not everyone gets that word every week. Not everyone gets that encouragement. Not everyone gets that challenge to fall into the life of Christ. And so in this Being Human series, which I'm sure has been crushing, everyone here is human, right? So it's relatable. And the being part of it, the actual waking up and doing what you do, that can be challenging. No matter what part of life you're in, everyone has different backgrounds, everyone has different circumstances, everyone has different challenges. And so being human is a tough thing. But the beautiful thing is that God has some instructions for us. Okay? Are we good? Let's see. Are we good back there? Okay. All right. There we go. Okay. So being human. A big part of this morning's lesson that I have for you today is the God's Redeemer call. God has called us to be redeemers. We have been called to the work of redemption. Are we good? Are we tracking? Okay. So, one of the most beautiful stories in the Bible, to me, is the story of Ruth. And when we tap into the story, there's a few texts. You have to bear with me this morning. There's a few texts that we're going to lean into. There's a few things that you have to be able to see. And then you're going to see the results of it. And so it might be slow to start. Just bear with me, though, right? I promise you, the reveal at the end is amazing. And so in Ruth 1, we have this situation in Ruth chapter 1 where there's a famine in Bethlehem. And so everyone's comfortable with the idea of Bethlehem. Everyone knows about the town of Bethlehem and how that whole area, how it's important to the Word of God. Thank you. Just the prophecy of Christ coming into that place. And so there's this famine in Bethlehem, and some of the inhabitants have to choose, are they going to stay home, are they going to leave? And so Ruth's family, there's a man that chooses to go, Elimelech, he chooses to go to Moab from Bethlehem. And so when they leave, it's because where they were was a challenging situation. Okay. And so here's what happens. They leave Bethlehem because there is a famine, right? And wants to support his family. And then tragedy strikes. And this man dies. And that's a tough situation in itself, right? And so here's this woman, Naomi, and Naomi, she's left with just her two sons. But then what happens to them? They die. And they had both gotten married before they died. But now it's her and her two daughters-in-law. And this is important to understand that back home in Bethlehem, when they left Bethlehem, they actually had property. They had land. They had a space to call their own, but the issue is that in their culture, in their time, that it could only be passed on if there was a son in the family, okay? And so here's the thing. Naomi has land, she has property, she has an inheritance, but she has no way to claim it. You guys with me? Okay. And so this is the state that she's in. She has an inheritance, but she has no way to claim it. And so she's sitting in this situation where she's in a foreign country, she's with her daughters-in-law, and she's like, well, I hear that there's been this resurgence at home. I hear that there's been this coming out of this era at home. So let's go back home. And so she says to her daughters, hey, look, my life is going to be tough. Why don't you go home? Why don't you go home to your family? Here's why. Her daughters wouldn't have any inheritance. And so she wanted them to go back and start over with a new family. Go back and just do this whole thing over in a better situation. Leave me and go take care of yourself. And so out of the two daughters, one of them wanted to hang back with her mother-in-law. And she says, this is beautiful. And this is important. Young people, there's some lessons here. There's two sides of the story. We're going to hit the young people, and then for us that are a little more seasoned, there's a lesson there. There's two lessons here, okay? Two stories working in concurrence. All right, so Ruth says, I can't leave you to be miserable. I can't just abandon you to go have a better life myself, right? Matter of fact, I'm going to go with you, and your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. And this is important. The reason why is Moab, I don't know if you guys know about the Moabites, but the Moabites came out of Lot. And that whole situation where he left Sodom and Gomorrah, and he fell with his daughters and that whole, so they were a spinoff of the Israelites, and they had some challenges. They had their own God that they served. They had their own religious rites. They had their own stuff, and it was deeply entrenched in their culture. And so what Ruth is saying is, I will give up my culture for you. I will give up my identity for you to go where you go. And so they start heading home. But it's a hopeless place. It's a hopeless place. Matter of fact, when they get back, the women in the community are like, oh, it's Ruth. Naomi's here, Naomi, woo. They're excited to see their family. And Naomi says, no, don't even call me Naomi. Call me Mara. And so when I read this story, I'm reminded of another story in the Old Testament, right? Do you know where the word Mara was used before? Okay, when the children of Israel were walking in the wilderness, they came to a place where there was like a little pool, and when they tried to drink from it, it was bitter. Okay? And so God asked Moses to throw a piece of wood into it, and it cleansed the water, and they could drink. But the word Mara means bitter. And Naomi says, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because my life is bitter. I don't have joy. I don't have peace. I don't have hope. I don't have a future. I'm going to exist in the rest of my days hopeless, because I can't have a son, right? She was past that season, okay? Even if I could, you wouldn't be able to stay around long enough until he was old enough to marry. So she's in a hopeless state. She said, I went away full. Now, this is crazy. They were in a famine. But even in that bad situation, she had her husband, she had her sons. So when she says, I went away full, I had what I needed. It wasn't the stuff. They had to leave their home. But I went away full, and I've returned empty. This is tough. Can anyone relate to that? Have you ever had that feeling of being empty? Okay. Now, this is what's so beautiful about how God works. I love this. There's a road to redemption. There's a road to redemption. Young people, this is for you. This is where it starts. This is what God taught me. Okay? Be like Ruth. All right. So here's the thing. They're in a really bad situation. They don't have an opportunity to gain their inheritance. They have the land. The land is there. It's theirs. Right? It's a family's property. There's no way of gaining it. And so Ruth and Naomi are living like paupers. And Ruth says, Mom, we can't just struggle like this. I have to go do something. I have to, it's the harvest season. I need to go out and I need to work. I got to figure out how I can take care of us. And so she goes out and she starts to work. And she goes into a field. And what they would do back then is they would have these harvests, and when the harvesters, whoever owned the property when they were harvesting, it was kind of like charity where they would let people come behind and pick up the stalks that had fallen to the floor. And so it was the way of giving back to the community, if you will. So Ruth was like, I got to go pick up. She wasn't one of the main harvesters. She was gathering scraps. And so she goes to gather scraps for her and her mother. But in this time, because of the way she's working, because of her work ethic, because of her faithfulness, because of how good she did everything, her attention to detail, she started to gain the attention of people who were paying attention to this young woman who just moves differently. And word started getting out about her as well, that she sacrificed her life and her thing for her mother-in-law. And so as this word travels, she finds favor with this man, Boaz, and he starts to set her up for success. And in this verse right here, 2:17 and 19, it says, Ruth gathered barley there all day in the Boaz field. And when she beat out the grain that evening, it filled an entire basket. Her mother says, where did you gather all this grain today? And Ruth told her, it was a man named Boaz. You guys still with me? Okay, all right, we're just tracking. We're tracking. Okay. And here's what Naomi says. Naomi says, may the Lord bless him. He is showing his kindness to us as well as to your dead husband. That man is one of our closest relatives, one of our family redeemers. Ooh, I love that. All right, what does that mean? Okay, so again, in their culture, you had to have a son to pass on your inheritance to. But they had a process that if something like this happened, there's a way for you to be redeemed. And so what the family redeemer would do, they would take on the responsibility of providing for the family. They would either marry the widow and bring that widow into their fold so that they can have their inheritance. And so what Naomi's saying is that this is one of the people who can actually bring us our inheritance. Now, more seasoned people, this is where our rubber meets the road. See that title? Whose problem is it? And so here we have this situation where Boaz is the redeemer. He's a family redeemer, but he says this to Ruth. And when he was addressed, he says, look, I am one of your family redeemers, but there's another man who is more closely related to you than I am. There's actually someone else who's closer to you, whose responsibility it is. There's someone who is postured and positioned by God to do what you're asking me to do, and I need to give them first dibs. So he gives us some instructions, and he says, I'm going to go talk to this man. I'm going to go talk to him, and I'm going to ask him if he wants to take on this responsibility. And if he does, then it's all his. But if he doesn't, I will take care of it. Isn't that beautiful? Whew. And so then this happens. And they had this process of having this conversation. They asked 10 elders to come with them, and they sat down together at the city gate, and they had this conversation. And Boaz brings this offer. He says, hey, look, there's this land, right? There's this inheritance that you can have, okay? You can own the land. You can add to your pool of resources, right? If you redeem this family, you can do that. However, by law, you're going to have to provide this woman with a son so that the land can stay in their family. And so what this man says is, all right, okay, the land part of it, I'll do the land part of it, okay? I've got that. Getting more land, that's cool. But then when he found out that he actually had to do more than that, when he found out that there was another element of providing the son and keeping the land in Naomi's family, he said, that I cannot do. Why? Let's look at why. The reason why he says I can't do this is because he had his own family and he had his own inheritance. He had his own worries that if he were to do this, there would be a chance that his children would lose out on something. So he didn't want to risk what he had for someone else. He didn't want to step into the role of being a redeemer because he wanted to keep everything that was already his to just he and his family. With me? Okay. All right. And then this happens. He passes. He decides, you know what? This is not it. That's not for me to do. I can't do that. So Boaz steps up. And Boaz, this man who has things going for him, this person who already is good all by himself, decides to step into someone else's situation and give them an inheritance that was always meant to be theirs. They could not do it for themselves. They had no way of accessing it. But he stepped in and he made the decision. And so when he does, and he marries Ruth, and they have a son, His name is Obed. And then he became the father of Jesse. And Jesse became the father of, King David. You gotta put some respect on his name. All right? Can't just say David, King David. But wait, what's going on here? You mean to tell me that in the lineage of Christ, that God used a Moabite woman who came from another country, who had to be faithful, chose to stay with her mom, even though they didn't have an inheritance that it could access by themselves. They had to be redeemed first. Someone had to step into their lives to do something to give them access. And from that process, King David was born. Are you with me this morning? Can we just walk out right now? Do we even have to continue? We don't have to. It's right there, right? Okay? Being human. I was just talking to Gabe a little while ago, and we were just asking a couple questions, and I told, when you're young and you have a lot of decisions to make, and you have a lot of different situations, a lot of decisions to make, it can be very, very heavy on your heart that you make the right decision. It's not easy. You don't know. Do I go left? Do I go right? And so what I told him was like, God works in every way. If we go left, he's there. If we go right, he's there. But what he's asking us to do is be faithful in our movements. Because sometimes God is asking you to redeem somebody. What if Boaz said no? What is the percent chance that David is born in the same place if Boaz says no? How much longer do we wait for David? Is it the same mix of genetics that it took to make him? What if Boaz did not answer the call that God put on his heart to step in and redeem? You with me? One of the things that I'm a big fan of right now is opportunity cost. And it's all through the Bible. You guys remember the story of Samson? Do you remember how it ends? Yeah? Did he do something good at the end? Was it his maximum potential? No. He left something on the table. In the life of David, he left something on the table. In the life of Solomon, he left something on the table. A lot of people leave things on the table because they don't listen to the calling of God. And what God is calling you to do is don't leave it on the table. That person that I put in your attention, I say it like that. God's putting people in your attention. He's putting them in your attention so you can pay attention to them. Because they need redemption. And you are the Redeemer. That's part of being human. You are the Redeemer. You are the kinsman redeemer. In this book, it doesn't say wait around for Jesus. It says Boaz, a human being, is one of our redeemers. He is the one who can give us access to the inheritance that is ours. It is ours, but we cannot get it by ourselves. There are a lot of people that God has put in your attention that they have this. This is twofold. They have this gift of salvation, and they can't get it by themselves. They're discouraged. They're depressed. They don't think they're worthy. They're as low as you can get. And they'd rather throw away life than to go on anymore because they're not saved. Right? Okay? If you're in that place, Christ died for you. He redeemed you with his sacrifice. And so that means that all the mistakes, all the grief, all the brokenness, everything that is in Moab, that the pain, the hurt. I almost stayed in Toronto we were living in Canada. I almost stayed in Toronto. We had a choice. We could stay in Canada or we come back in the U.S. My older brother and I both chose to come back to the U.S. The reason is we've gone through so many negative things in Toronto, we don't want to be there anymore. There was so much connotation. There was so much the context of the situation. Not that it's a bad place, but we went through so much loss there, we just needed a fresh start. And that's why we chose to come back to the U.S. Sometimes in that situation, in the Moab of your life, when you're looking for a way out, when you're so tired of all the things, it's hard for you to move on, because when Ruth and Naomi get back to Bethlehem, Naomi says, I'm Mara, I'm bitter. She carried that baggage with her into this new place, and she knew that there was nothing more for her. Go and read the end of this book right here. It's just too much text. I didn't want to bombard you with text today. But go back and read this, because the language that's used is actually very beautiful. It says, when Ruth has a son, the women in the neighborhood said, now Naomi has a son again. They said, Naomi has a son again. Naomi has joy now. Right? She was redeemed. And if you're in that position in life right now where you need that redemption, where you need to cut, hey, God's a God of cutting ties to the brokenness of your past. He's more than enough to help you let go of all of that. And what he's saying is, step into the gift I have for you. I was having a conversation last night with my wife's cousin, and she's staying with us right now, and her daughter, Zamora. I don't know if you guys know Zamora. That's my other girl. So I have Macy, I have Zamora. Zamora's 5. She just turned 5. Macy's 4. And so those are my daughters. Those are my girls. I love them to pieces. And they're jerks. Right? They are frenemies, but they're jerks. And they like roast you. I'm like, when do you guys learn how to do this? Like, they're like, oh, Daddy, no. And I'm like, dude, come on, man. Be nice to your father. All right? And so, but we were talking last night, and my cousin Trisha, she's been through a lot. And she said, Ray, what does abundance mean? She was writing, and I was on the couch after Music Mania, which was awesome. And so I got home, and I'm just like sitting down. She said, what does abundance mean? And I said, abundance is like, if there's a lot of something, like, we're abundant in cornfields, and like in the area you drive by, you see a lot of fields here, a lot of farms, cotton, corn, greens, whatever. So that's abundant. And she's like, okay, cool. But it's like abundant life. And I was like, oh, that's actually biblical. I told her that's actually biblical. So it's something that Christ said. He said, I've come to give you life and life more abundantly. And what that means is that you have peace, you have joy, right? You have that everything you need is there. You don't fear waking up in the morning. You're at peace. Doesn't mean there's not challenges, but you're at peace. And it reminded me of this verse. She didn't even know this, right? This was just a conversation we had last night. But this is the verse. I love this. This is from Psalms 107, verse 2 through 9. And I love this verse. There's so many little elements here. And it starts off, it says, has the Lord redeemed you? Okay, so we used to be in the club, right? We used to be, in the smoking court, right? I just learned about the smoking court like last month, right? All right, so there was a smoking court at Huntsville High. Do you guys know about that if you were in Huntsville? You can admit it, right? It's okay, right? God redeemed us from some things, right? We were once lost, and now we're found, okay? I know I was very lost, all right? And so the question is, has the Lord redeemed you? Were you in a situation where you were tired, where you were overwhelmed, where you didn't feel like going on anymore? Has the Lord saved you from that? If yes, then tell about it. Tell others he has redeemed you from your enemies, for he has gathered exiles from many lands, from east and west, from north and south. Some wandered in the wilderness. I love this. Some wandered in the wilderness, lost and homeless, hungry and thirsty. They nearly died. People are going without. They're missing key elements that are required for them to live. They don't have it. And then I love this part so much right here. Lord, help me, they cried. Have you guys ever cried out to God? We're like, man, I don't have it. You don't know what else to do. You try to figure it out by yourself for a while, right? cry out to God. Lord, help, they cried in their trouble. And he rescued them from their distress. He led them straight to safety, to a city where they could live. And I love that. It doesn't say a city where they can exist. It doesn't say a city where they can survive. It says a city where they can live. See, that's what redemption is about. The people who God is putting in your attention, those people might be surviving. Those people might be existing, but those people are not living. And there's a big difference. We see people, and people know how to exist with a smile on their face. People know how to survive while they're looking okay, but they're not living. And what Christ came to do, if you look at all the stories where Christ stepped into a situation, all those people were surviving or they were existing. Right? And then hey, look, at this point, everyone in here should be watching the Chosen series. All right, so we can just have these conversations with no context, right? So everyone should be watching the Chosen series. If you're not watching Chosen, you should be, right? And so you see the transformation that happens where there's brokenness and despair and frustration and family discord and all these things that come around with the baggage of being broken. And on the backside of it, when Jesus steps in and he brings his peace and his way and his life and his truth, situations are turned around that once looked like they would never be turned around. It says, let them praise the ones who were redeemed. Let them praise the Lord for his great love and for the wonderful things he's done for them. For he satisfies the thirsty and he fills the hungry with good things. Wouldn't you know that's what you're called to do? And that looks different for different people. Some people need encouragement. Some people need mentorship. Some people need a helping hand, a place to stay. There's a whole gamut of things that people need, but they're in need of it and they don't have access to it without you stepping into the situation and allowing God to work, because that person you pay attention to may be the grandfather or grandmother of David. Let's pray.